Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. We have a truly global audience listening in. To those of you joining from North America, good morning and a happy Thursday to you. Folks from UK, other parts of Europe and South Africa, good afternoon. And to those of you from the Asia region, very good evening. I'm Subhra Krishnan, CEO of Lemnisk. Lemnisk is the world's first customer data platform uniquely crafted for banking, insurance, and financial services marketers. Our platform is driving millions of dollars worth of incremental leads and conversions for the world's largest financial brands. We do this by putting together your customer's profile across different marketing data sources and channels, and then by helping you create a machine learning-led experience to target your user on the right channel at the right time and with the right message. If you'd like to get to know us better, please drop us a note on marketing@lemnisk.co and we'll be sure to respond to you. Today's webinar is specially created for finance marketers who are looking to understand more about a customer data platform and how to go about choosing and implementing one. This is a first of its kind webinar that really attempts to give you a cohesive picture of this exciting new category that's truly starting to live up to its promise and is rapidly becoming a must-have for CMOs. And there's arguably no better expert in the world right now that's more qualified to talk about CDPs than David Raab. David is a renowned marketing technology analyst and consultant who has helped hundreds of companies find the right systems for their needs. Years back, David was among the first few people to recognize that digital marketing systems were not just proliferating, but also that the data these systems were throwing up was getting siloed, making it really hard for marketers to understand their customer holistically. David also realized that there is tremendous opportunity if you can bring these disparate systems together. Around this insight, David coined the term CDP, or Customer Data Platform, in 2013 and founded the customer data platform CDP Institute in 2016. The CDP Institute's work has been seminal in helping marketers understand the need for a CDP and the ways they can drive value from it. David, a very warm welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Subhra, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and good afternoon, morning, evening, night to all of you wherever you may be. I'm delighted to be here. So let's see if we can advance our slides.
Before I hand over, David, to you to kick things off, I just get some quick housekeeping stuff out of the way. Firstly, this webinar will be made available as a recording for all of you that signed up. So do share it with your friends and colleagues who could not join today. Secondly, we've reserved time for Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And I'll try to get David to respond to as many of these as possible. So I have quite a few of my own, actually, David. And for all of you from Asia, there's a little surprise for you that I will reveal at the end of this webinar. So that sort of a tantalizing input said, David, let's get rolling, and it's over to you.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's start with a simple but not very pleasant truth, which is that financial services lags other industries in individualized marketing. This is a particular chart from a study done by actually several companies combined, but what we see here is that the individual marketing was only 32% of financial services compared to 38, 33, 63% in other industries. So financial services marketers have a real challenge ahead of them because it's very difficult for them to do these things. It's not that they don't want to. They're eager to change. They're eager to use things, and they are increasing things like triggered messaging and personalization by demographics, but they are still not doing as much as they would like. It's certainly not that they don't want to do it. They recognize the need. They recognize that their customers are expecting it. They recognize that their competitors, at least some of their competitors, are doing it quite well. So we have a real desire to do better marketing, which of course raises the question of why haven't they done it yet if they want to. And Of course, there are a number of barriers, but by and large, most of them have to do with technology. They can't deliver the personalized content. It's not that they don't know how to do it, it's just they can't really find a way to make it happen. They can't, it's very challenging to integrate their systems. Strategy is strategy, but then we are back to data unification. So 3 of those top 4 barriers are barriers that relate to technology to some degree. So this is exactly why customer data platforms exist, is because customer data platforms at least promise to solve this problem, and hopefully by the end of the next hour we'll convince you they actually do solve the problem. But at the moment we'll just talk about the promise, and we'll talk briefly about the definition. This is the CDP Institute's definition of a customer data platform: marketer managed system that builds a unified persistent database that's accessible to other systems. So let me just unpack that very, very briefly. Marketer managed simply means that it's packaged software. It's something that marketers control. It's not a custom data warehouse that's built by your IT department and that they control. It's unified persistent customer database, so it's taking the data, unifying the data from all your different systems, storing it persistently so that you can look at things like trends and changes over time. And it's a customer database. It's organized by customer, primarily first-party identified data, as opposed to anonymous third-party data, as you might find in a data management platform, a DMP, for example. So that's obviously the crux of it. And then accessible by other systems means what it says, that other systems can access the data, as opposed to systems that might build a unified database, but only for their own purpose. Most software is designed to do something, whether it's a CRM system or marketing automation system designed really to send messages. And it may build a unified database, but it doesn't really share that with others because that's not what it's built for. So that's sort of the general, that is the general definition of a CDP. And I think Subrat now will talk a little more about more concretely what that might mean.
Yeah, right. I think to sort of just contextualize what David mentioned here and to understand how a CDP works and creates value, let's look at the case study of HDFC Bank. HDFC Bank is among the world's top 10 financial services firms, and I think a truly innovative and powerhouse bank. And it's also a great example of how a CDP can produce massive impact at scale. You know, with the CDP in place, HDFC Bank, for instance, was able to improve its digital conversions by 400%. If you can move to the next slide, David. So HDFC Bank, as is want of any super large enterprise, especially a finance enterprise, has got different best of breed marketing systems to address different needs. So, for example, they have an Adobe Target that's powering their website, Senseforth that's powering their chatbot on the website. They call it Eva actually. They have an agency that's taking care of their programmatic display, and they've got a different system for email, SMS, browser push, and they've got Zine1 powering their app. So really the first step is to bring together all of the different data sources and marketing touch points. So, so the data that's, the behavioral data that is getting generated from the desktop website, the mobile website, the app, all of that data, data that could be lying in the CRM systems that's relevant for marketing. An example could be next best offer data that tries to upsell, cross-sell specific offers to customers. It could also be third-party data from audience data that is getting bought. Now, all of this data really gets into the CDP, and here it's resolved to a single user level, and it's kept in a persistent fashion. And once you do that, it really opens up a wide variety of opportunities. So at a very simplistic and very basic level, HDFC can now create its own marketing segments and activate them on channels of choice. Very importantly, and as David mentioned before, this data can be exposed for all of the downstream marketing systems to connect with and use on a real-time basis, so that every system is sending the same consistent message to users at any given point in time, and therefore you end up creating a very coherent customer experience. And a very interesting application of the CDP that we are seeing is creating massive lifts for HDFC Bank is what we call a single user journey orchestration. So, if all of the marketing systems are feeding data about how, when, and to what message a customer is responding to or not responding to, if you're feeding all of that data in, then it's also possible for you to figure out the channels an individual user is likely to respond on, and the sequence in which the individual should be targeted to really have the best chance of engaging with a specific message. So I think doing this, once you do this, there's a ton of interesting marketing programs that HDFC Bank runs on top of the CDP, all of which has really combined to create a lift of 400% on digital conversions. So that's a very quick sort of case study for you to really understand all of this in action and how a CDP really drives value. Back to you, David.
Great, thanks, Subra. And I think what I like about this diagram and about this situation is that it makes so clear how many other tools the CDP is connected to. We have several Adobe tools, we have Convonix, we have SenseForth, we have Zine1. So the CDP is really not doing all the work, but it's providing the central data and some of the central decisioning segmentation to support that. So it's a very important thing to understand. The CDP complements those other solutions, those activation solutions. It doesn't replace it, even though, as you also see on the diagram, we have a couple of Lemnisk delivery mechanisms: browser, push, notification. So it's a really great example of sort of how a CDP works and how it fits in with the rest of the world. So, okay, so yes, the CDP is wonderful. You've just seen this great case study. Why hasn't everyone bought one? Is it because the CDP Institute hasn't done its job? Well, maybe, but we think that what we find is that people still don't understand it as widely as we would like. It is a relatively new category, and it makes some claims that are frankly a little hard to believe. And it also is challenging because there are a lot of CDPs. We're just actually finishing up some research that I'll probably publish next week. We've identified, as of this moment, 61 different CDP vendors. And there are a few others that we don't even include in the list. And they vary greatly, as you can imagine. It's a good thing that they vary greatly because it means you have a better chance of finding one that you need, but it also adds to the challenge of selecting. So let's talk a little about solving those problems. In particular, let's talk about solving the problem of selecting the right one. And we're going to talk you through an 8-step process. First, we'll talk about the understanding of CDPs. Let's deal with that. People don't understand a problem. You've already seen the CDP Institute's definition here. Gartner recently published a paper with their definition, which does a very good job, I will say, of presenting what we do in a CDP. They list 4 functions: data collection, unification, segmentation, activation. They stress first-party data. They stress that it's from different systems, online, and it's a usable format without storage limits. So unlimited storage, very important for the CDP. Can hold everything in some form. Doesn't always make it accessible, but it can certainly hold it. Or rather, it doesn't make it immediately accessible. It's always accessible, and sometimes you might have to do some things to get it out of the sort of initial storage. Unification, again, we've talked about connecting all the data attributes and devices to create that single customer view. Segmentation, even though it's not part of the core CDP definition, in fact, all CDPs that we're aware of do segmentation so they can extract lists. It's critical to give marketers control, as Gartner points out here, and the actual activation piece. They can send the segments to those execution or activation tools for all the things. So good definition by Gartner complements our definition quite nicely. So hopefully now you understand a little better, and you've seen Subra give you a proof point that, yeah, it really does what we say it does. Next question is how to pick the right one. Part of the challenge there is that you're marketers. You're not software experts. And if you wanted to be a software selection expert, you probably would be in a different department. So we can't make you experts. We can, however, propose a process that puts you through, gives you a little better way to do this. And we will, in fact, give an 8-step path to CDP enlightenment. We're going to go through each of these in a moment, so we'll just list them quickly here. The point of the process is we start with your marketing programs. We start with what you want to accomplish, and then we drill down into what that implies, and then we define systems for that, requirements from that, and then we look for systems. So it always starts with the marketing program. So that's step number one, is simply build a list of what you expect to do with your CDP. Specific programs, achievable programs, programs that are worth doing. Here's just some examples. You might want to be able to pick the best channel for a message. So identify the channels that are, and these are the steps that go into that. As a marketer, you can probably sit down off the top of your head and list a dozen things that you would kind of like to do, and you would probably do it more or less like this, just in a quick set of notes. So again, just sticking with that first one. So I want to pick the best channel. How do I do that? Well, I have to identify the channels that for each customer that are most appropriate, and then I want to craft a journey for that customer. So this implies that for any marketing segment, there are thousands of unique payouts automatically created based on the individual propensities towards the channel. So this is sort of the high level, kind of getting a picture in your head of what it is I'm going to do with the CDP, what I'm hoping to accomplish with the CDP. And again, maybe about a dozen or so of these is a good number. Once I've now listed my desired programs, now I want to go back and in a little more detail, think through or just list out again the specific steps. So back to our pick the best channel, we are going to go through step by step and say, okay, in order to pick the best channel, I need to first identify all the customers during the interactions. I want to then store that interaction in a unified profile. I want to analyze the interaction history so I can figure out what the best channel is for each customer in each situation. Then I want to use the best channel. So these are the particular steps or processes that I need in order to execute that program, and that's step two. And again, imagine you have dozens of these. Now I take that list and in turn go through and say, well, what systems do I need to execute the processes? Okay, so I'll slow down a little here because I'm probably going too fast. So again, if you look down there on the left, this is from the previous slide where we talked about picking the best channel. Well, my first step was to identify individuals during oral interactions. What systems are involved in that? My website, my email system, my call center, all my customer-facing systems. My second step here was to store the interaction in a unified customer profile. Well, I need my unified customer data, second from the bottom on the right there. I don't think you can see my, maybe you can see my cursor, which of course is my CDP. We're not going to presume it's a CDP, but that's what it is. So I need a place to store that data. I need to do the analytics to select the best channel. So I need some sort of a best channel selection system down there on the bottom at the right. And then of course I need to use the best channels when sending the messages. Now I'm back to my website, my email, my call center, my mobile apps, my CRM system, which are going to be sending messages as well as tracking them. So now I've started from this very general list of, oh, I kind of want to pick the best channel, and I've gotten specific steps and specific systems. Let's assume I've done this now for a dozen or so vet products, and now I can begin to look at all my programs and say, okay, across all my programs, what systems do I need and what capabilities do I need? So in this particular case, we've listed out 7 of these. The actual analysis that this is part of, there's a paper that this is part of that we published with Lemnis, has a dozen, I believe. But so for pick the best channel, you've just seen, I've checked off the delivery systems that I need, and I've checked off the delivery systems that my other programs need. We distinguish between delivery systems, which are the customer-facing systems, decision systems, which are your analytics, and your campaign managing, your systems to decide what messages to send, and then data systems, which is where your customer data is actually stored. So I've checked off now in each of these in this matrix which programs need which systems, and I've highlighted the systems that don't exist, or I've shaded them rather. So there is no second-party website, which might be a tool to do that, which would be some sort of a connector. In this particular case, this company, will just assume arbitrarily, doesn't have a best message selective analytics capability. It's something they'll have to add. And of course, they don't have a CDP, so they don't have the identity management or the unified customer data, or the second party matching capability. So this is very useful because it immediately tells me, among other things, that I look for those shaded boxes and I say, whoa, personalizing my second party website is going to be a challenge because I don't have the systems in place. Forget about everything else. I just don't have the systems. Even for this pick best channel, I don't have the systems. The only thing I need to add really in analytics is the best message selection. Not that hard, actually, if I have the right resources. But still a bit of an obstacle. So maybe I might want to start with something that's simpler, that has fewer checks. So I might go over to the right side there and look at personalized live experience. Only 2 systems required. It doesn't require the third party matching. So a little easier for me to implement that. So I begin to use this to think about how I'm going to sequence my deployment so I can do things in a way that requires the least change up front while immediately delivering some value. Now I'll drill still deeper and look at the specific systems, the specific data that I need in my system. And there are 2 sort of sets of requirements. There's some general requirements that are common really to all CDPs, but more importantly to most marketing applications, which is I do want to store the original detail. I want to capture everything and put it someplace in case I need it later. So I don't know what I'm going to need. I might suddenly find out that location matters. And if I didn't capture location, I have to go back and start capturing it, and it takes me months, possibly even longer, possibly years to accumulate enough of it to be useful. If I stored it all, and CDPs are really good at storing a lot of detailed data cost effectively, then I can go back and look at it historically without waiting to accrue it. And I want to store it permanently for exactly the same region. There's no point to retaining it if I'm not storing it. In addition, financial services marketers have a number of very specific requirements. They need certifications for security and privacy and so on. They need creative control, which really, again, has to do with compliance with regulatory rules, make sure that things are done right. They need certain kinds of flexible deployment because they go across different channels. They often need to have it installed in-house because that's a company requirement. They don't want to use a cloud-based system. They need certain kinds of custom processing. They need API access. They need various MarTech connectors. They need custom algorithms. Has to be real time. They need to expose standard variables. So those are some of the specific requirements that we have. And I think, Subra, you were going to comment on this as well?
Yes, I mean, just a couple of things to add to that. One is that, yeah, obviously, compared to most other industries out there, finance, I guess, would be one of the more complex ones in terms of the channels and touch points that customers engage with the brand on. You've got the website, you've got branch, you've got ATMs and whatnot. So, and so that also means the finance marketers generally have more marketing systems as well. And like you rightly pointed out, finance obviously therefore brings a much higher level of data privacy and security requirements, which places a huge responsibility on the CDP to make sure these requirements are adhered to. And I think one of the things is that that I guess is is something that sort of whose importance is underscored or underestimated is that there are a lot of data variables that are very unique to the finance industry, and really ensuring that these variables are understood and that they get captured and propagated across the marketing system ensures number one, faster time to value, but also feeding these unique data variables into machine learning algorithms I can result in massive value getting unlocked. So if you look at insurance as an example, the starting point for a prospect that's looking to buy an insurance plan would be to go to the website and take a quote. Now, the quote itself consists of a lot of data about the user, basic things like demographics, to advanced data like the term and the cover that the user is looking for. And these are, I would argue, exactly the nuggets of data that good algorithms thrive on and drive value from. So when you look at implementing a CDP, I think there is a very strong vertical or domain aspect to it that should be latched onto. And I think doing that means that you have a much better implementation, and you can really drive a lot more value out of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So now the process switches. We've spent all this time so far working to understand our own requirements. And that's quite an accomplishment. If you're playing along at home and you've actually done this, you could sort of pat yourself on the back a little. Now we switch from looking at our requirements, which we've pretty defined if you think about it in fairly good detail, to finding what systems will meet those requirements. And this is where things get a little confusing, and this is where many marketers would want to look to outside resources, at least research and possibly consulting. And I'll admit to being a consultant. So I like consulting, but you do your own research, that's okay too. Or often many people now have marketing technology staffs that actually know a lot about these things. But in any event, you have to understand now what your options are. Now I know my requirements. Now what will meet those requirements? And part of the confusion with CDPs is that they get confused with a lot of other kinds of systems, because there are a lot of systems that store customer data, and most of those vendors, if you ask them, can you do what a CDP does? They will say yes, and then they'll rush back to the office and look up what CDP even stands for, because the salesperson might not even know. That's just how it works, right? So but when you really look at it, if you look at the specific requirements of CDP, okay, over there on the left of this chart, ingest structured data and assess, which is like transactions, semi-structured and unstructured data, web, log, web data streams. Unstructured data might be text from say, social media feeds, things like that. Adapt easily to change, very important, because marketing systems change all the time, and some systems are not so easy at adding new feeds and recognize new data sources, retain the original detail. We talked about the importance of that. Transforming that data into usable formats. It's not enough just to store it in its glory. Like, you really need to actually transform it into something useful, store it permanently, resolve identities, obviously very important to build that unified customer view, track identities over time. As people get new email addresses and move and do whatever they do, you want to connect it all to build that long-term history. And then share the data with other systems, which again is a core CDP capability. Once you begin to look at those, you realize that things like a data management platform over in the middle there, DMP, yeah, they can ingest structured data, and that's pretty much what they do. And they can share the data that they store with other systems, but all they're really storing are these very limited profiles, typically related to cookies, that are designed to help build advertising audiences. And that's great. They're very good at it. Just because they don't do this doesn't mean they're not good at what they're built for. And that fact, that's the challenge with this and other systems. The other systems are built to do what they're built to do, and that's not what a CDP does, and they're not built to do what a CDP does. And when you build a system to do one thing, it's going to be good at that, but that implies choices that make it less good at other things, including what a CDP does. Same with CRM, same with marketing automation. They ingest structured data. They really don't ingest semi-structured and unstructured data. They're not very good at that. They're really not very good at adapting to change, and change meaning new inputs in particular. They generally don't store all the original detail. They generally have very, very limited transaction capability, because they kind of expect the data to be built. They expect to generate a lot of their own data, first of all. What they do take in has to be in certain ways. They do have permanent data storage. Most marketing automation CRM don't do much in terms of identity resolution, very basic if you're lucky. They don't track identities. They're not really designed to share. So they're really just not a very good fit, even though you will hear vendors in that space tell you, oh yeah, we do what a CDP does. And then there are integration platforms, products like MuleSoft, which Salesforce just bought, which have some capabilities. They do share data between systems. That's what they're built for, but they don't store it. They just share it. They just take it from system A, run it through a process, and push it into system B. They don't keep a record. So if you want to look at trends, if you want to look at how customer identities have changed over time, if you want to do some of the really important things, if you want to go back and look at historical details for something you didn't know that you needed, and now you find out you do need, it's not there. They don't store it any place. So kind of a fundamental problem with those solutions. Again, not what they're built for. They're built to move data and integrate processes across systems, which is great. They're very good at it. Not built for what a CDP does. CDP, obviously, going back to the middle of there, does everything. This is our slide. Plenty of things the CDP doesn't do, let's just be clear, but it does what it's designed to do. Data lake often, and data warehouse often sort of considered very similar to a CDP. Data lakes, they do pour all the data in. That's what data lakes are. They're just a place that you take your data and dump it into a big lake. But they don't do much. They don't prepare. They don't transform it. They don't make it available. They don't do identity resolution. They don't do identity tracking. Really, they sort of expect the user, who might be a data scientist or some sort of an IT person, to take that data and make it available. So really all they are is a convenient collection point. Again, very useful, not saying it's a bad thing, just it's a different thing from what a CDP does, because marketers don't have those skills. Marketers want the data to be prepared within the system so it's ready to be used by their CRM or DMP or marketing automation. Data warehouses are a little more structured. That's really the difference between a data lake and a data warehouse. They tend to be more limited, though. They tend to be focused primarily on structured data. They tend to be run by IT. They're actually because they are so structured, they're very difficult to change. Typically, adding a new source to a data warehouse can be a major project, can take weeks or months to make it happen. Sometimes it never happens at all. They're designed to share data, but only kind of certain kinds of data. You don't usually get real-time access and real-time updates, for example, with the data warehouse, or if you do, it's very, very limited. So we can pretty safely remove DMP, CRM, marketing automation, integration platform, those things on the right. We can kind of remove them from consideration. They just are so far and so different from the requirements of the CDP that you really wouldn't truly consider as an option. You do, however, want to consider those other three, okay? Because as we saw in the previous slide, they do have a fair amount of overlap with the requirements. When we begin to drill a little more deeply, though, into financial services, this is where those tend to come up short. All right, if we look at the certifications required, the ISO and various kind of privacy and security certifications, data warehouses are built in-house. They don't have the certifications. I mean, maybe your people built it right, but they don't have the external certifications. Whereas a CDP that's built for financial services will have that. Not everyone will. Not every CDP will. In fact, most of them won't. But the ones that are built for that will have it, because that's simply what the designers and the developers decided to do. Issues on deployment we talked about. Custom processing, yeah, CDP, again, data warehouses, they do that kind of data transformation work. They do prepare the data, but data lakes, not so much. They really, again, they just sort of throw the data in there and then expect any complex processing to happen outside of the system. API access, which is very important for letting your external systems, your connectors, your MarTech and your AdTech systems connect. Not so much for a data warehouse. Maybe take SQL queries, but you have to even set those up in advance. Certainly a data lake, it's just extracts. That's how they're designed. It's not a flaw. It's just what they do. Whereas financial CDP usually does provide API access, which makes it easy to, say, pull out single records to display in a customer service system. Pre-built connectors, so you don't have to custom build the connectors. A data warehouse, data lake, they're custom systems. Any connector is going to be custom built just by definition. CDPs are going to have a lot of connectors that are pre-built because the vendors already built them, because they know they needed them because previous clients required them. Custom algorithms for processing, for things like predictive modeling or just calculating complicated metrics. Yeah, that can be built into a warehouse. That's kind of that's part of what you do in a data warehouse as part of your setup. Again, not in a data lake, done outside, usually possible in a CDP system. Real-time access, very rare in a data warehouse. Again, takes a lot of special setting up. Not at all part of a data lake. Sometimes part of a CDP, some do, some don't. Again, if that's your requirement, which it will be in financial services, you just simply find one that does that. Exposing standard variables, calculated variables here. yeah, again, part of what you do in a data warehouse, not so much a data lake, definitely part of a CDP. So again, obviously we're a little biased, but you know, the CDP will generally come out ahead on these general requirements. If you happen to have a great data warehouse in place and your people have built the certifications, maybe you can make it work. If you're starting from scratch, everyone looks at building it in-house. The IT people always insist on looking at it, and as they should. But you'll go through an analysis like this, and in most cases, you will find that buying a package system like a CDP is going to be faster, safer, quicker, cheaper than building it from scratch. Back to our list of requirements here. So we now, if you think back to our little matrix of what we needed to do, we drill still further in. We've built our list of systems earlier on. Now we're going to go and look at what integrations do I need, because integrations are really what's important when I think about connecting systems. So what integrations do I have? This is just a random example. We kind of pretended there was a company. What might be typical? They might have connected their data lake to their email and their website and their mobile app, CRM, ATM, but not to their chatbot, not to their call center, not to their field events, not to their second-party website, which didn't exist. On the other hand, the data warehouse would be connected to more structured data sources like email and call center, but less so typically to something like a chatbot or a website. CDP, of course, doesn't have any connectors here because we don't have one yet, but the question is, what's it going to take to fill in those gaps? And because it's harder to connect often to a data warehouse than to a CDP, even though you already have some existing connectors in place, it may still be less effort to build all new connections into the CDP than it is to just fill in the gaps with those other systems. When we get over to decision systems, do they exist and are they integrated? And again, you're going to have some in place and some won't. None of those will be connected to your data lake typically, because that's not what data lakes are for. And your data warehouse hopefully is connected to at least a few of them. Doesn't mean it doesn't, it just means it connects to them. CDP, again, by definition, at this stage, we don't have one yet, so nothing's connected, but much easier to connect. So it's that second step there at the top of comparing the effort to fill the gaps that you really need to look at. But you certainly need to start with an inventory of what connections are in place and recognize that just because there's an X here doesn't tell you the nature of that connection, the quality of that connection, right? Is it connected in real time? Is it capturing all the detail or just some of the detail? A great deal of nuance beyond simply these little check boxes here, but this is a good place to start. That's all we're giving you. Here is a framework for things that you want to start to go through kind of quickly and can almost sit down with one of your IT people and sort of fill out all these forms, if you think of these as forms. And then you'll go in and do the detail. When you get into detail, you're going to find, of course, that you partially comply with a lot of these requirements, not simply yes or no. It's not an X or not X. It's, you know, some sort of a more detailed assessment, and that's fine. But first, you want to get a kind of a gross picture so you know where to focus your effort, because vendor selection is all about putting your energy in the right places, because otherwise, if you try to just analyze everything, it takes forever and you don't get any work done. Finally, we find a solution, okay? Before we were just sort of getting our data organized and kind of understanding the lay of the land and sort of what we had to do. Now let's done that. So let's fill in those details we were just talking about. Talk to your IT people. If you can't not talk to them, and you should talk to them, even if you had the choice not to. You still should talk to them because they know a lot of good stuff and they control the systems. So you deal with your requirements. Now you identify the candidate solutions. This is where you look at information like what's published by the CDP Institute, where we do publish comparisons of different vendors with some of their features, not super amount of depth in that, because everybody has to go out and research their own, but at least a little idea. The vendors themselves obviously have information. You know, vendor salespeople are always delighted to chat with you. So figure out which systems are appropriate, which to consider, build your business case. A lot of the research you did on defining your target programs will now help you with that business case building, because that's what your business cases are based on. Test if you need to test. Okay, do a pilot project. It's much easier today than it used to be. And if you have questions that you're just not certain about the answers to, go ahead and run a pilot. And then when you do your deployment, deploy it in stages. Remember, think back to, again, our list of what the requirements were for the different programs. Some had more requirements, some had fewer requirements. You know, start with the things that are easier to do, deliver some value, get some experience, and then add things bit by bit, rather than starting out with your most complicated process or your most complicated project, which might be the most fun and exciting, but because it has many parts and many new things, will also be the most difficult to succeed at. Now, I think at this point, we were going to take some questions. Is that right?
That's right, David. In fact, I had a few, and I'll just be greedy here and I'll just jump in with mine. So I guess one of my basic questions is it possible to actually go through this iteratively and in a slightly more incremental fashion? So, for example, when we talk of listing the marketing programs and then the processes around these programs and the systems used, assuming, of course, that underlying there is sort of a definitive need for a CDP that's been nailed down, then could these be done a little bit more incrementally, or would you recommend that let's just sort of take a much more holistic view to this?
Well, again, I'm hugely oversimplifying for the purposes of presentation here. We really recommend that you kind of do this iteratively. So you might start off just listing on a whiteboard the programs and kind of list, get a good list, and then at a very high level kind of fill in some of the information about the processes and the systems. But you don't have to do each one in great depth. Once you get through that, you can then go in and drill into a couple in more detail. Because what you'll find very quickly is after you do 2 or 3 programs, you see a great deal of overlap in the requirements. So you can do a couple in depth, and that will surface most of your requirements.
Got it. And in terms of putting together, and this is a question that I get asked by CMOs all the time, just sort of putting together a business case or an ROI, an upfront ROI calculation. How should marketers, especially CMOs, think about this so that they can justify an implementation of this kind? What's sort of your experience with that?
Well, my experience has been there's kind of 2 situations. The one is where someone sees this as a strategic need. We have to treat our customers as individuals. It's simply something we have to do, and really, crunching the numbers isn't the issue. We know to go forward as a business, this is simply a requirement. It's no more than doing the ROI on your website or your call center. It's simply something you have to have. And if somebody's gotten the vision, that's great. That works wonderful. And honestly, that's usually where it succeeds. Other situations, somebody, either the CMO has it, but there's somebody over in finance or the CEO, someone wants a more rigid justification. Like all marketing investments are speculative. It's hard to do prospective ROI, any marketing investment, but you do your best guess. You sit down and say, again, here are my programs that I expect to run. Here's the value of each program that I can project. I know how many customers it's going to impact. I have some sense of the value of the behavior that I'm going to change. And I can kind of add those up and estimate the incremental revenue or profit or whatever metric I'm using that I'll build. And I just add enough of those to build a business case for it. So, if you're in a company or a situation where you need to do that, again, that starting with that same program list I keep talking about gives you the way to do that too.
Got it. And we've spent time together just sort of talking through so many of the CDP concepts and ideas that are emerging. And it's very exciting to see how this whole space is playing out. And I know that, David, as we're seeing more and more use cases emerge and sort of this space mature, and the CDP Institute has obviously been at the forefront of this as well in terms of really the whole the whole definition of this space is evolving. and the understanding is evolving, right? And one of the things that the institute did, I remember, was really talk through the sort of flavors or the variants of a CDP. One that's focused only on assembly versus one that does assembly and a little bit of analytics. And then the last sort of variant that's probably emerging right now is one that goes the whole hog and actually influences the experience as well. So when a CMO is really taking a call, in that context, is there merit in going one versus the other? Do you see that experience-led platforms are scoring a notch higher in RFPs or consideration sets? How do you see that playing out?
Well, what we do see, and you haven't seen this research because I haven't published it yet, but I'll publish it shortly, is that the industry is shifting very much towards the ones that do everything. So all three categories, access, analytics, and engagement, I think what we call them. And that's because marketers are looking for a broader solution. They want as few systems as possible. They have way too many systems. So if they can find one system that does several things, that saves them all the integration work. It gives them one vendor who can provide more services and more training and support. So that is definitely the way the system is going. In fact, those vendors who do that, 18 months ago, the first time we did the analysis, were about 20% of industry employment. They're now just over half, I believe, of industry employment. So huge growth in that third category of the people who do everything. Doesn't mean it's for everybody. If you have great engagement systems in place and you don't want to tear them out, then you wouldn't want to buy a solution that does that. So it depends on the company and certainly the vendors who provide only access are in many cases the right solution. So it really depends on your situation, but overall the trend is definitely towards the systems with a broader set of capabilities.
Yeah, and on that same note, I guess, when we look at Lemnisk's vision and how I look at the CDP space as it might potentially play out going forward, and that's one of the reasons we also are trying to specialize in one vertical, finance, is that a CDP investment is a non-trivial investment in terms of time, resources, money. So do you see this that the CDP would start getting looked at as a generic data asset whose applications could potentially go beyond digital marketing and into broader growth problems? Do you see this sort of an evolution, and what are your thoughts on where this might be a few years down the line?
Oh yeah, we definitely see that. And actually you touched on another trend, which is that vertical CDPs appearing, people who specialize in things like financial services. Because even though the CDP is very flexible, you always want a vendor who understands your business. It's really important in most cases for a buyer to make sure that you don't have to explain your industry to someone, and that they will build, say, connectors that are for industry appropriate systems. So we see that, and then we definitely do see recognition that once you've built the CDP, you have this great asset of all your customer data. Operations people can use that, customer support people can use it. Every department really throughout the company has great use for this data. So even though we defined it as a marketer managed system, we recognize it's truly a corporate asset, and that once it's there, other parts of the corporation very quickly become interested in using it. And again, because the CDP is designed to share data easily, it's actually quite easy to make it available to them, as opposed to a system that wasn't built for that.
Absolutely, makes sense. That makes so much sense. And we're just about nearing the end of the webinar time here, so David, thank you so much for your time. This was super insightful, and I think for anyone that's looking to get a CDP up and running, select it and just sort of get it implemented, this is a very, very useful framework. And just for all of our people that's listening in, we actually are releasing a white paper as well around this that sort of gives you a slightly more deep down view into each of these steps. So be sure to download that as well. David, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. And thank everyone for listening.
And one last thing, the surprise that I promised I would reveal at the end of the webinar, especially for those of you that are tuning into this webinar from Asia. David's actually going to be here in Asia towards the third week of July. So we're actually the CDP Institute is going to be here, and we're going to do stops in Dubai, in Singapore, and in Mumbai. So just do make sure that everybody, all of your friends, colleagues get to know about it. We'll obviously send you emails as well. Please do join us for these sessions. It's going to be a super insightful one. So that's the big sort of reveal we have for you. It's going to be an exciting July, folks. Thank you for listening in, and have a happy time implementing a CDP.